The 2023 CX-30 is hands down one of the best crossover values in America. And that's not in spite of the fact that it's a deeply conflicted vehicle. I actually think it's because of that fact. Now, what do I mean by conflicted? This has a ton of different priorities going on that seem really at odds with each other. Mazda is trying to be the premium alternative to Toyota and Honda, think something along the lines of Buick or Acura, but this is the least expensive all-wheel drive crossover in North America. If you're looking for all-wheel drive and 8 inches of ground clearance, and you only want to spend about $23,000, get the CX-30, it's an excellent option. But that's kind of at odds with their premium mission. It also has the most power available in the segment. This is the 2.5-liter turbocharged engine with 250 ponies, but it's also one of the few without a fully independent rear suspension. It has a traditional automatic transmission, no CVT under the hood, but it's only 6 gears. It has the most driver-oriented suspension and steering tuning, but some of the skinniest tires in the segment. It has one of the most attractive interiors, that's definitely a big asset, but the infotainment system is certainly infuriating. All combined though, this has more personality than all of the competitors put together, and that's why I would buy it over pretty much any of the competition. And surprisingly enough, the competition for the CX-30 isn't just vehicles like the HR-V, the Kona, and the Seltos. It could also be considered vehicles like the GLA, the XC40, the X2, and of course the Lexus UX. And I'm really not kidding about that. Styling is definitely a big win for the CX-30. This is a little bit narrower than some of the mainstream crossovers like the Honda HR-V in the subcompact segment, but it's pretty similar to a lot of the European entries. And like the European entries, it can get pretty pricey. The premium trim is the one that's going to get the steering headlights. These are some of the best headlights available in North America, interestingly enough, but these are going to cost you at least $31,500. The ones in the base CX-30 are similar, but they don't steer in the corners, and these steer very aggressively. Going in for a closer look, you'll find some things that you don't find even in more expensive options, like an available 360-degree camera, well-integrated front parking sensors, projector LED headlights rather than reflectors, and LED turn signals at the bottom. In addition to the distinctive Mazda grille, we also have a fairly distinctive long hood profile, something that we see in the rest of the Mazda lineup. It certainly gives this a little bit more of a luxury vibe than you'll find in the Honda HR-V or a Toyota Corolla Cross. This is also a little bit more style forward, I guess you'd say. The Corolla Cross certainly has a taller greenhouse. This has a much higher belt line, so kids might feel a little bit more claustrophobic in the back. At 173 inches long, this is right in the thick of things in the segment, right between the HR-V and the Hyundai Kona in terms of length, about the same as the Kia Seltos, also very similar to the XC40, X2, and the Mercedes GLA. It's about 4 inches shorter than the Lexus UX, but I think this is actually packaged a little bit better inside than the Lexus. Helping bolster its premium credentials, this CX-30 has full LED taillights, including an LED amber turn signal that fades on and off rather than simply blinking. That's a cool touch. Down here we get twin exhaust tips, and the only badging for the turbo is right over there on that side, and it just says turbo. In addition to standard all-wheel drive, every version of the CX-30 gets 8 inches of ground clearance standard. So this is certainly going to be able to go a little further off the beaten path than the average small crossover in the US. Every model also gets the black cladding you see here around the wheel wells and then down there along the bottom of the vehicle. And unfortunately, they also all get the same tire width, 215 millimeters. It would be logical to assume that the least expensive all-wheel drive crossover in America skimped a little bit on driver assistance tech, but that's not the case. Mazda gives all version adaptive cruise control, autonomous emergency braking, lane keeping assistance, lane departure warning, auto high beams, and driver attention monitoring. Available on different versions of the CX-30 are blind spot monitoring, rear cross traffic detection, front and rear parking sensors, the 360-degree camera, and the steering headlights. This is the fully loaded model, so of course it has everything. Every CX-30 in America is going to have a 2.5-liter gasoline engine under the hood. The base version produces 191 horsepower, 186 pound-feet of torque, and then you can add a turbocharger to the engine to bump things all the way up to 250 horsepower. Interestingly, Mazda publishes a horsepower number for regular unleaded and for premium unleaded, but it's not like a light switch thing. Depending on the climate, you will get 250 horsepower with regular unleaded if it's cool. So for instance, right now it's about 50 degrees. It was foggy this morning. On regular unleaded, this would still be making 250 horsepower and 320 pound-feet of torque. It's then sort of a sliding scale from there down to 227 horsepower and 310 pound-feet of torque, depending on the fuel that you're feeding the engine and the temperature outside. The most efficient version is going to be the base engine. All-wheel drive, remember, is standard. You'll get 29 miles per gallon out of that model. If you opt for the turbo, it falls all the way down to 25. And let's just say we've been averaging a great deal less than that this week. If you want the best fuel economy in this segment, that would be the Corolla Cross Hybrid. It's EPA rated for 42 miles per gallon combined, but the base version is right in line with most of the competition. Most of them will range between about 27 and 30 miles per gallon. I'm a little conflicted about the 6-speed automatic under this hood. Clearly, it's more engaging than the CVTs you'll find in mainstream competitors, but it's certainly not as engaging as the 8-speed automatics that you find in more premium options. This transmission has some unusual jumps between gear ratios. They're not as evenly spaced as I would like, and it certainly doesn't shift as quickly as an Aisin 8-speed automatic that you'll find in some of those European options. On the other hand, I'm not really sure I should be complaining because with a starting price of around $23,000, this is significantly less expensive than any of those European alternatives. Opinions on this interior are going to depend on what you're cross-shopping against the CX-30, but let's talk about the functions first. We have a tilt telescopic steering column with a large range of motion, 2-position memory over there for the driver's seat on the dashboard. The driver's seat is a multi-way power unit with 2-way adjustable lumbar support. The passenger seat is fully manual, even in this approximately $45,000 version. And that is the tricky thing for this most premium version of the premium entry in this segment, I guess you'd say. Compared to the luxury alternatives, you'd get 4-way lumbar support. You might get an extending thigh cushion. The passenger seat up front would probably be powered. On the other hand, if we're talking about the least expensive versions of the CX-30, this is a very comfortable driver's seat. Even though we aren't going to get the same seat that I'm talking about right here, we certainly wouldn't get the memory, we still, however, get the tilt telescopic steering column and the same basic seat design, which I find very comfortable. According to the numbers, this should have about the same kind of legroom as the Honda HR-V, but in reality, it is a lot tighter back here. I only have about 3/4 of an inch of legroom with the front seat comfortably adjusted for me at 6 feet tall. And if I try and scoot over to this side, where the front seat is all the way back in its tracks, I have enough foot room down there for my feet, but can't actually get my knees really in there with the seat when that seat is all the way back. And of course, because this is a little bit narrower than average for the subcompact segment, the rear bench is a little bit narrower than average as well. On the other hand, we do find a soft touch armrest with 2 cup holders and air vents in the back, something that you don't find in a lot of inexpensive crossovers. The long hood profile is at least partly to blame for the tighter dimensions inside. That long hood profile and this sloping rear end combine to give us less cargo room in the back as well. We have 20.2 cubic feet of cargo space back here. That is definitely below the Corolla Cross at 26.5 or the Honda HR-V at 24.5. That may not sound like a great deal, but it yields 1 extra 24-inch roller bag, and back here we could only squeeze 3 in. On the other hand, this cargo area is about 30% larger than the GLA's cargo area and about the same size as an XC40. A solid benefit to the cargo area is the shoulder belt for the center seat position that comes out of the seat itself, not out of the side of the cargo area like we find in the Subaru Crosstrek. We have a 60/40 folding rear seat design and the buttons positioned over here where you can access it either from the cargo area or from the passenger area. Under the load floor, there is a tiny bit of additional storage space, mainly where you can put things like your tire iron, the jack, and then we have a spare tire, something that you don't find in a lot of the European competition. In the middle of that, we have the optional Bose subwoofer. The cargo cover, that would be one of the hard variety if somehow it wasn't missing in this particular test unit. It would actually be hinged right back there towards the seat backs, and then there would be little tethers to actually pull it up when you open the hatch. Definitely remember that we're looking at the most expensive version of the CX-30. We find a sunglass holder right there by the sunroof controls, extending sunshades on the sun visors, a pretty standard size moonroof over just the driver and front passengers' heads. We get height adjustable shoulder belts and 2-way adjustable head restraints for the driver and front passenger. I'm definitely partial to the color combo going on in this interior. Let me know what you think of that. This is something that Mazda's been doing for a while with this almost white leather upholstery. We find perforations in the seat back and seat bottom cushions, although these seats are not ventilated. We don't have terribly aggressive bolstering on the seat back or seat bottom cushions, so larger folks shouldn't have any troubles in here. Moving over to the front doors, you'll notice the sort of tricolor scheme going on in here. We have a charcoal middle section of the door, the brown accents there around the armrest. The armrest and this upper brown section are a soft touch material, but it's actually not stitched. It does have stitches there, but here's what's going on. If we move over to the dashboard, you'll notice it's just an injection molded piece that's then been after stitched to give it the impression of multiple pieces of material. This is also something we find done to great effect in the Buick lineup for the same reasons. Below that, we have a soft touch section of the dashboard. This actually is a little bit squishier than the upper section of the dash. We then have two air vents down there in that middle area, but nothing going on between them. That's just styling to help tie everything together. Hard plastics obviously lower on the dash, for instance around this glove compartment. It is a little on the small side. I was not able to fit a 10-inch tablet computer inside. There's some extra storage space going on down there at the bottom of the doors, but not a bottle holder like you find in a lot of small crossovers. And you'll notice no speaker going on there on the front doors. Instead of having the speaker there, they've actually positioned the speaker sort of integrated into the structure of the vehicle right there in the footwells. That saves room and apparently helps improve audio quality as well. Speaking of audio quality, this has the optional Bose audio system, so we have speakers right there in that little triangle in the front door. You'll find harder plastics up there at the top of the dashboard, but let's swoop along so you can see the general style here. So we have the big hump over there for the instrument cluster, and then the touchscreen, or sorry, not touchscreen infotainment system right here in the middle of the dashboard. That's actually one of my complaints, is that we still don't find a touchscreen in here. You do find a touchscreen in some Mazda models, but the ability to use them while driving is limited depending on the version of the vehicle and the version of the software you're looking at. Again, lots of attractive stitching going on there. We'll take a look at the software in a bit. Below that, we find the controls for the dual zone automatic climate control, the keyless go system right there. Below that, we have an area where you can keep your smartphone, no Qi wireless charging mat though, and kind of odd trim designs. I'm not quite clear what this little bit over here is for, and the storage area is just a little bit too small for some of the larger smartphones with a cable connected. Two big cup holders are happening right there. Pretty traditional console shifter. There's a sport mode toggle over here, just sport mode, no off-road mode. With this toggle, you'll find an off-road mode on the other side. Manual shift mode right there, electric parking brake, auto brake hold, and then the controller for the infotainment system. This knob controls essentially everything, and then the smaller knob to the side is volume and track forward backward. The downside to the controller design is that operating Android Auto or Apple CarPlay certainly takes a lot more attention than just stabbing an option. Of course, once we're in the Mazda native interface, this is certainly designed for that rotary controller, so that makes a lot more sense. Going back to the center console, we find a center armrest that moves forward and backward. You actually have to move it back like that to open it up, and then it hinges open. In here we find USB inputs for the infotainment system, a 12-volt power port, and then some additional storage there. I do think that this sliding operation is a little bit odd. I wish it just opened without having to slide in advance. One of the reasons the binnacle is so large on the driver's side is because we do find a windshield projected full-color LCD heads-up display, something you don't normally find in a lot of inexpensive crossovers. Of course, obviously by the time you've worked your way up to the model that has that, this is no longer quite as inexpensive. Down here on the instrument cluster front, we have a partial LCD design, so approximately a 7-inch cluster right there in the middle of everything for that speedometer, some additional driving information, and then tachometer, fuel gauge, and engine temperature gauge are just regular analog dials. The round steering wheel should be familiar if you've driven most Mazda products lately. We have small paddle shifters on the back of those side spokes. It's not overly thickly rimmed. Some folks might like that, some don't. I certainly prefer a slightly thicker rim than we find here. You'll find the controls for the infotainment system on the left side, volume up, down, track forward, backward, voice command. The info button runs through options in that multifunction cluster. And then over here on this side, we find the controls for the advanced lane centering system and the adaptive cruise control. To the left of the steering wheel, there's an additional button bank. This is where we find the off-road drive mode, button to disable the parking sensors, enable the 360-degree camera system, and then turn off all the active safety systems. The first thing you'll notice about the CX-30 out on the road is that it comes in two flavors, mild and wild. The base engine will get you 0 to 60 in 8 seconds. This turbocharged engine in 5.7. This is certainly one of the fastest entries in this segment, including a number of the luxury alternatives. If you want to go faster in something like an XC40, you can, but you're going to be spending an awful lot more for that XC40, and of course you'd have to get the EV version because the regular version actually is not going to really be faster than this. The odd twist here is that there's nothing in the middle like we find in the competition. So say a Kia Seltos, you can get the 1.6 liter turbo in that model. You could also get something like a Toyota Corolla Cross with the hybrid system that's going to get you better fuel economy than this and get you faster than the base version 0 to 60 as well. Out on the road is really where we start seeing some of the dual personality things with the CX-30. Acceleration, definitely very swift. Standard all-wheel drive, fantastic. 60 to 0 stopping distance, little on the long side, 121 feet. And that really did surprise me because the nature of this is definitely eager. It has that eagerness that you want when you floor it. Whether it's passing maneuvers going 30 to 70 miles an hour, or whether it's 0 to 60 times, both of those very solid in the CX-30 Turbo. Handling numbers, you might be surprised by some of the skid pad scores. This is not as excellent as you might think, and I think that's just down to the tires, but it is very confidence inspiring. Just the way that this feels around the corners, the firmness of the suspension, it doesn't have any body lean, practically no tip and dive is going on. This is a very stable, very, very level vehicle. The one trick here is that the non-independent suspension in the rear certainly becomes upset over broken pavement before a fully independent suspension would. And, you know, I know there's nothing wrong with a non-independent suspension. Don't get me wrong here. Some Mazda fans, comment down there in the comment section and say, you just don't understand the mission, it's totally fine. Here's the thing. It is so good everywhere else that the non-independent suspension just comes across highlighting a deficiency that doesn't really need to be highlighted because everything else is so fantastic. And you do not get that upset rear suspension feel in something like an XC40 or a BMW X1 or X2. And again, remember that I'm talking about German luxury options and Swedish luxury options in the same sentence as the least expensive crossover in America with all-wheel drive. That is how good this is in every other area. So some of these, little niggles, I guess, come across as maybe minor complaints, I guess, but certainly something to keep in mind. Handling feel is absolutely excellent, and the grip could easily be addressed by sticking wider, grippier tires on that. You cannot fix steering dynamics, steering feel, etc. as easily as you can fix the grip situation going on here. So keep that in mind. First thing I would do if I got a CX-30 Turbo, swap these tires out for something more grippy. The ride quality that we get in the CX-30 is definitely part of this conflicting missions thing, because we have 8 inches of ground clearance, which is ostensibly suitable for going a little further off the beaten path, but going further off the beaten path with this firm suspension would definitely be less comfortable than something like a Subaru Crosstrek. This suspension is quite firm, and that's part of why handling is so good in the CX-30. There's very little wallow, there's very little tip and dive. Even if I'm seesawing the steering wheel, going over bumps, this is a very firm suspension for this category. And that's why when it comes to ride quality, I'm going to have to give this a C+. The firmness of this makes this probably the sportiest feeling, I guess you could say, in the segment, but if you're looking for a comfortable highway cruiser, I'm not sure that the CX-30 would be it. As far as daily commuting goes, I would say it's really just down to personal preference. Do you prefer a firmer ride? Do you drive on roads like I do every day, where I would certainly prefer a better handling vehicle like this, and I can tolerate the ride quality out on this gravel road for a while? Or are you doing long highway journeys where you might certainly want to get something a little bit more comfortable? And of course, if you're frequently finding yourself going out there to national parks, spending hours on gravel roads, going closer to that trailhead, etc., you might want to consider something a bit softer. When it comes to cabin noise, this also scores better than average, 70.5 decibels, and very much in line with a lot of those luxury or premium alternatives. On the downside, fuel economy is a little bit below where you might be expecting. In this 2.5-liter turbocharged model, been averaging 20.1 miles per gallon over a week of mixed driving. That is certainly not up there towards the 25 mile per gallon score, which is already a little bit on the low side. The low fuel economy is likely due to a combination of factors. The first and most important of which is that the CX-30 is so much fun that I've been driving it harder than I would drive a Corolla Cross or an HR-V or really anything else in this segment outside of those European options, because this is that much more fun than anything else in the mainstream segment. The other thing, though, is probably the 2.5-liter turbo in its own right. It's certainly larger displacement than the 1.6-liter that we find in the Kona or in the Seltos. And then, of course, there's the 6-speed automatic transmission. This is just not as efficient as some of the competition out on the open highway because the engine is spinning a little bit faster, and some of the competition can really get those engine RPMs down, which helps improve the fuel economy. Aside from the lack of an independent rear suspension, the 6-speed automatic transmission is my only other gripe out on the road. The 6-speed just doesn't have as evenly spaced gear ratios as we find in, say, an Aisin automatic transmission or Honda's 10-speed automatic, or some of the General Motors and Ford automatic transmissions also have, I think, better gear ratios available. This shifts pretty quickly, it has a nice solid feel to it, but it's lacking those extra gears for higher fuel economy and for better downshift performance that you will find in some of those luxury competitors. But, again, keep in mind the price tag. Let's talk CX-30 pricing before we get specifically into the pros and cons. Again, this is the least expensive all-wheel drive crossover in America, starting at $22,950. It definitely undercuts the Subaru Crosstrek by a decent margin. Likely because Mazda is a relatively small company, they couldn't afford to decontent the CX-30 quite as aggressively as we see other car companies do with their base models. So you still get the 8.8-inch infotainment system in the dashboard. Still get Apple CarPlay and Android Auto, same 191 horsepower engine as well, 6-speed automatic, obviously all-wheel drive. Rain Sense wipers are standard, which is an interesting twist. Also, the push-button start system. You also get the same 8-speed audio system as most of the trims you'll find on the dealer lot. A lot of this feature set is unusual when we're talking about inexpensive vehicles under $23,000. Most base trims have fewer speakers. They definitely don't have rain-sensing wipers or push-button start when we're talking about base models of inexpensive vehicles. Now, there are some downsides to selecting the base model, some limitations, I guess you could say. We don't get roof rails. There are only 3 colors to choose from, so you'd better like a black one, a blue one, or a white one, and that white one is going to be $400 more expensive. You also have to want cloth interior because this is the only model with cloth. On the other hand, if you want cloth interior and you don't want leatherette, this is the only way to get cloth. The other thing worth noting, and perhaps the reason that the CX-30 is not the best seller in the segment with this base price point, is that prices start escalating pretty rapidly. If you get the Select trim, $25,400 is that price tag, but it does add on blind spot monitoring, rear tinted windows. You won't find those rear tinted windows in the CX-30, so it looks a bit more like a hatchback than a little crossover. Roof rails, 2-zone climate control, rear air conditioning vents, and of course a leather-wrapped steering wheel with the leatherette interior. Then things start moving again pretty rapidly. Want a moonroof or a power driver's seat? That's going to be $28,550 at least. If you want the power hatch or the steering LED headlights, that's going to be $31,500 at least. If you want the turbocharged engine, and I suspect a lot of people at least want it, that's going to be $33,800, plus, of course, the extra cost for feeding the turbo, because your fuel economy will go down from 29 miles per gallon down to, 21 to 22 miles per gallon in the real world. If you get carried away with options and get yours fully loaded like our tester was, then you'll end up at $37,406. Sorry if I misspoke earlier and said it was over $40,000. I was reading the wrong MSRP sheet. I was actually reading the one for the CX-50 that we're going to be talking about next week. So sorry. Just under $38,000 here. Now let's dive into the pros and cons. Obviously, we have the fun-to-drive nature. But on the downside, we have that 6-speed automatic transmission, which is a bit of a mixed blessing. The interior design is solid, but the infotainment system is infuriating. The back seat, it's a little snug. The cargo area is also a little bit on the small side, but the turbocharged engine is absolutely in a class of its own. Also, I love the styling. I know that every time I say this, there are going to be people down there in the comment section that hate Mazda styling. I would say it's almost universally attractive. Then we have the price tag, which does escalate pretty quickly. And bearing the price tag in mind and the premium design in mind, that's why I'm conflicted with the rear independent suspension and the choice of tires on the CX-30. Because this has so much potential, and Mazda missed it just by the tiniest, narrowest window. Something like the BMW X1 or the Volvo XC40, they're certainly going to handle better. But then this is really a compliment to Mazda that we can talk about a BMW and a Volvo in the same sentence as a Mazda. But it also means that it's not quite in that category. It's definitely a solid middle ground between something like a Buick Encore, which honestly is really just a Chevy Trailblazer with some slightly different styling here and there, and that luxury set. The Mazda CX-30, there are definitely some inexpensive components here and there. I would actually say that interior parts quality is approximately the equal of something like the Kia Seltos, but the styling is really what helps the interior. And speaking of the Seltos, let's move on to the competition. The Subaru Crosstrek is the best seller in this segment, but it's going to cost you significantly more starting, $24,995. It's about 10% more. The Crosstrek is also a bit more wagon than it is crossover. It's essentially an Impreza hatchback that's been lifted. The CX-30 is definitely more boxy, but with those flowing lines, giving it somewhere more of an in-between look, somewhere between a station wagon and a lifted bob. The CX-30 definitely has a flowing theme to it, but also when you look at its profile, it's certainly boxier and more upright than the Subaru. Subaru has been pretty resistant to putting a turbocharged engine in the Crosstrek. We do get a larger and more powerful engine, but that actually just makes it about the equal of the base CX-30 in terms of power. Then we have the Honda HR-V, also a solid seller in this segment, but the current generation is honestly a little bit boring, both in style, the terms of the way that it drives, and some of the specifications as well. It's not as big on the inside as it used to be, but it does have a significant advantage when it comes to the pricing range and, of course, decent reliability. It starts at $24,100, but only goes up to $27,650, so a significantly narrower price range than the vast majority of the competition. Now, the downside is how Honda gets to that narrow pricing range. It doesn't have a lot of options, so if you want more luxurious touches inside, you want something that's premium in a small package, that's certainly not going to be the HR-V. But it might well be the Kia Seltos. Now, keep in mind, pricing-wise, the Seltos pricing is 2024 pricing because they recently refreshed it. CX-30 pricing has not been announced for 2024, and that means the Seltos may actually be the least expensive all-wheel drive vehicle next year. It's honestly really, really close. There is a weird twist with the Kia pricing ladder, though. It's kind of weird. It starts with an all-wheel drive model, $24,390. That gets the 2-liter engine, all-wheel drive, the CVT. Not as exciting as the 6-speed, of course. The next step up is slightly more, $24,990, but you lose all-wheel drive. And that's because instead of the all-wheel drive, they've cashed that in and they've given you more goodies and features on the inside and on the outside as well. This is a really interesting twist. I think that it makes sense. If you live in a climate like Texas or Florida where you don't need all-wheel drive or you don't want all-wheel drive, you could get some of those other features at a lower starting price. But if you are interested in some of them, you're going to have to work your way up the ladder. It's worth noting that if you want an 8-speed automatic transmission and a turbocharged engine and a long powertrain warranty, you'll find all those on the Seltos for $29,990. That's $4,000 less than the turbo in the CX-30. But you get at least $4,000 less performance, of course. 195 horsepower, 195 pound-feet of torque. It's a lot less of both than you'll find in the Mazda. The 8-speed automatic transmission is definitely a better transmission than the one that we find in the Mazda. It's faster shifting, the shifts feel better, etc. But everything is going to take longer in the Kia because you just don't have as much power. 0 to 60 acceleration is a full second lower. Also, highway passing maneuvers, those are going to take longer as well. Bottom line, the Mazda is an absolutely excellent option, especially when we're talking about the base version. Really, the base model value is the entire story with the CX-30 because you get so much from the upper-end models jammed into that base trim. I really honestly don't know why Mazda didn't strip out more of it to justify that low price tag, but any way you slice it, it's you, the customer, that ends up winning. The trouble is, if you get carried away and you want some of those additional features, the power liftgate, the moonroof, the turbo, etc., then you really are solidly up there into a different echelon when it comes to pricing. Compared to something like the Buick Encore GX or the Lexus UX, you'll really see where Mazda's pricing has gone towards the more premium side in the upper-end trims. An Encore Avenir is under $33,000, and the Lexus UX actually starts less than the top-end version of the CX-30. Now, admittedly, I think the CX-30 is a better vehicle than the Lexus UX, especially when we're talking about the base versions of the UX, but it doesn't have a Lexus logo on it, doesn't have the Lexus dealer experience or Lexus reliability. It also doesn't have a standard hybrid system, all of which you will find on the Lexus UX. But again, the fact that we're talking about a Mazda and these luxury vehicles in the same sentence is really telling you something. But because Mazda really does want us to be talking about these things, Mazda themselves wants to say, we are a premium manufacturer. We have premium vehicles for a affordable price tag. That's where I would say, yes, you have premium vehicles, but I really want premium suspensions next time. If there's one thing that I would hope would happen in a refresh, it would be fitting a slightly different suspension to the rear of the CX-30. It's already very, very good, mind you. And again, lots of disclaimers here. It is very good for a mainstream vehicle, but because Mazda wants to crack into that next level, I don't think that it's quite there yet as far as the rear suspension performance, but it is incredibly close. Let me know what you think about all that down there, and if you could tweak one thing on the CX-30, what would it be? I might also say I would want some option somewhere maybe middle of the road between the base version with the cloth seats and the next model up, maybe leather-wrapped steering wheel, still cloth seats, a few of those other features, etc., tinted windows, something along those lines. Let me know all that. Be sure and find us over at Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, all of the social places, and stay tuned for some more inexpensive vehicle coverage here at Alex Autos. See all of you next week.